So welcome to the digital consulting related first one on the day 2. Okay, so number 1, you need to download the white paper which has the link below. Okay, once you do that, you will require to go through it a little more in details, so you'll understand. For people who are not familiar with digitalization to the extent, it will help the purpose. Okay, number 1. Number 2, what we will cover now is the approach, right? First of all, you need to understand why digitalization. Okay, of course the white paper will give you the details and all the factors that we discuss now in much more kind of conducive fashion, because it has details in terms of written matter. But from a larger understanding perspective, why people take digitalization transformation in the first place, right? Digitalization is taking place in larger organizations and SMEs as well, because it enables them, with the virtue of automation, to quickly change their business models or set up their line of products, the new line of products, at very, very small cycle times, so that they can reach the marketplace much faster than compared to their competition. Okay, that is the very purpose of digitalization. Why? Because digitalization automates each function. That means the entire operation is automated and put to the level of complete, people free, if you will, right? So people don't have to divulge so much into it, but the process, which is automated by using computing power of the computers, will enable this activity at much faster pace than doing it manually. That is the very purpose behind digitalization. Okay, and you'll understand, get deeper into it once we go into the subsequent ones. But always remember, digitalization is taken up by customers to create their ecosystems, right, which is automated, and then they so create their eco space so that they can change their business models at very frequent times, because the world around us is changing so frequently. And competition always takes over, or somebody other who's a small startup can always take over a larger organization because of the speed, right? Hence, this plays an important role when those things are happening. Got it? A typical example here would be, before I get into details, is what we did and was explained in those concentric circles from RISE 1, right? RISE 1 and RISE 2, which we said now digitalization has enabled individual because of the computing power. And we mentioned those 4 concentric circles, that how you can start from your laptop, which is like digitizing yourself, to the point of, after enhancing yourself, to the point of creating your entire digital ecosystem, which then you can divulge into, create more assets, and keep on multiplying it. Now you look at this and broad base this, right? At larger organization level, there are hundreds and thousands of products out there, each of them in a hybrid fashion. They there's diversification in assets itself, right? They work in various niches themselves, or even not even niches, they work in verticals, if you will, and those verticals have the respective horizontals and so on and so forth. So there's a whole matrix of activities happening. So once they kind of automate this whole operation through putting up a new, or rather bringing out a new product, and then working with new partners and helping partners to automate, makes the system work independent of a lot of people, right? Because typically that is where the delay happens when you do something manually, right? Typical case being your Amazon, right? Started with a book, kind of a library of sorts, to book selling, to the point where now that they're one of the best supply chain companies besides being a technology company, all right? So that's how it works, okay? And because it is so automated, they can go to the world out there and deliver things at the same speed they do anywhere, at any part of the world, right? That's how it works. So with that said, we will go into each of the elements and the approach for digitalization as a process. Okay, the first one is, the first one is to understand the vision of digitalization. Okay, why the particular organization is actually want to go through the whole journey of digitalization. Okay, so that becomes primarily the most important factor here. Now, once if that is understood and the reasons are justified, right? Because it's a long drawn journey, okay? It doesn't, you start now and it will end tomorrow. That's not the way this goes, right? This is on, it goes into years, okay? Depending on the size of the organization and to the level of digitalization that one wants to do. But you cannot do half digitalization, right? You have to do complete digitalization, because the larger purpose is to create that ecospace, your ecospace and your ecosystem, which is automated, right? That's the purpose. It's a paperless office with the minimal amount of people that are required to do the job, because the computing does the needful. All right, so that's the larger purpose. So with that said, understand the vision. Okay, if the vision resonates with the fact that it will justify the entire process, then the first kind of checkbox is tick marked. All right, and also please understand, almost 70 to 80% of digitalization fail, okay, because of the reasons, because of these reasons. Because it's not clear, and it's a long drawn battle, takes too many resources, and it's a churn. So with that said, the second one, okay, in the approach series is understand the level of digitalization currently. Okay, very important factor, by the way. Now, the very fact that some organizations have started their process internally, they would digitize some elements, okay. When I say digitize certain elements, for example, right, they might be using manual papers for reporting purposes. They would have files which were done on paper earlier for their accounting elements of things, or they would have a filing system which was using paper to be seen and to be referred to, right? Now, this is the most simplistic level, mind you. Now, suppose you put all these things into the computer as scans in a filing system, which can be used as a database to pick out as soon as possible, right? So for anybody in the world. Now, they would have done something like that because something is required urgently. So they would have taken it tactically towards the fact that something is required at the topmost level and is required urgently. So papers don't serve the purpose. So they would have done something. At a higher level, typically an organization would have set up an ERP system, enterprise resource planning system, right? Which would have automated maybe the finance function, maybe to some extent, say the HR function, if you will, right? Because of the employees there and so on and so forth. Now, this would have been in part and parcel of things, okay? But when you look at digitalization holistically, right, you'll have to see that how much of digitization has happened already and how much will need to be done, with the vision in mind that what is the final outcome they require with the virtue of digitalization. Okay, so once you understand, and there are ways of finding out how, to what extent is the current digitalization, digitization, to enable the digitalization to happen, and then you have a gap. Okay, how much is to be filled. Now, each of them comes with a goal, and we come to it how that approach works. Okay, so for the moment, as an approach, please understand, you'll have to put a level of digitization for each of the elements or the functions within the larger organization as an operation. Okay, so that's the second point in the approach. Third is evaluate the current systems. Okay, when digitalization in its complete form will require some high-end computing, it will require the latest cloud-related engineering with the right kind of platforms, because then the traffic would have increased in the operation, the usage of the current infrastructure. So that plays an important role. So what is the current system? That means what I talked about was the more hardware and the infrastructure elements, but within the infrastructure, there are various software related applications that will be used, right, at various levels. There are licenses for each of those, there are subscriptions for each of those, and for larger organizations there are multitudes, there are about thousands of those. So how is the current system working and operating? Is it synchronized or is it harmonized enough? That means is each of them exchanging data enough so that they are not duplicating these efforts? Now, those things become the evaluation of the current systems, okay, so that at a right time you can harmonize these, where the data has a single source of truth and everybody can use it constructively when they are relationally kind of connected with each other. So that's the current systems. Then you have to do the gap analysis as mentioned earlier, right? So if you know the vision, that means what is the goal of digitalization. If you understand the level of digitization that has happened right now, Okay, and please understand, I'm mentioning digitization because the amount of digitizations that go into place will create the larger digitalization, that is your ecospace and the ecosystems that are being created. So again, so the vision has to be clear. Number 2, understanding the level of digitalization currently. Number 3, evaluate the current systems. That means just so that you know where the gaps are. Number 3 is you put that gap analysis in play to understand that what is typically need to be done from point A to point B, and then you create a roadmap for that. Okay, clear? A roadmap is specifically to achieve the goal, what needs to go. They can be further broken down to milestones. All right. So that's the fifth point that we talked about. Sixth point. Not one person can come and do everything. Okay, not possible from a large organization point of view. Depending on the size of the organization, of course. Of course, the IT companies now have become so large that they can manage singularly altogether some of these functions completely. Okay, but as a customer, the bigger they are, they will not typically leave it to one kind of partner to do this. They will find multitude partners so that there's a backup system, so to speak, and the competition will help them get to the point faster where they want to go. Right? Of course, each of these things have their own nuances and so on. So we'll not get and dwell in those, but let's focus on to get to the digitalization elements of things. So once you have the roadmap as a consultant, you might want to recommend the kind of partners who can execute the technology elements in this. Okay. Typically, technology, they require 3 things, right? One is technology, one is the processes that have to get automated, and thirdly is the infrastructure elements that require automation. Okay, when I say technology, it would mean the interfaces and so to speak the backends, which is your applications and so forth. But when I talk about infrastructure, it consists of the software and the hardware elements of things. So these 3 things are typically required to be automated. Now, with that said, the relevant partners are then chosen, okay, to do the needful. And once a partner come in, they start making the technology related roadmaps, and then they start suggesting the architecture for doing these things. Now, if you as an individual can do that, right? Some of us could. Then you keep the complementing partners with you who then suffice that need to do the larger picture, okay, which you then can go about doing as forefronting this exercise as an assignment. Okay, not only a consultant but also as an executionist, right? So you take partners typically to execute these things, and where you play the part of the consultant who is directing what is to be done. All right, so project manager of sorts, right? But you should know what you're doing. But people who don't, then they play the part until the roadmap, and then they get the right partners to go about creating because they're better than you. That's the typical way this works. Then you recommend a structure, right? So every digitalization, okay, will come into existence because it requires its own governance activities. Okay, it cannot work on a day-to-day activity the way maybe their IT team or their operation team works, or the specific function works. So this requires a structure of its own. Okay, and that structure will be suggested how to define that, and and so on and so forth. But define that structure upfront so that you have the right kind of stakeholders there who can then come and jump in at the right time of the roadmap and go about executing the way the outcome is thought out, or the goals to be reached as per the milestones. Got it? Then it typically ends with a change management strategy, because what has been kind of executed also will have to get adopted, and adopted typically is by the internal and external stakeholders. And internal stakeholders typically are your workforce and your all the levels and the bands that we talked about earlier, and the external guys are your partners, right? So all of them need to adopt the new systems that have come into existence by virtue of changing your process, your application, that is your UI, right, and your basic infrastructure to start using the new way of working. All right, that's the very purpose of digitalization. So to adopt you have to do a change management kind of an activity, which is again a transformation activity for humans to make that change, basically because the technology has gone through that change, which has already gone through a transformation. So humans go about making their respective transformations, and the deeper topic will be covered in change management, what goes into it. Again, a very detailed topic, right? And it's pertinent to mention that people, I had mentioned this in Rise 1, Rise 2, right? There's a book that has been written, Digitalization by me, which has all these ingredients, right? While we get to the point of the change management, it's recommended you download, or you get to that point if you have a KDP or you have an ebook out there, or you buy that book out and start reading it. That will help your purpose to get to change management very fast. Okay. So with that said, this is typically an assignment and the approach that one takes towards digitalization. There's lots that goes on, okay, and will come with practice. But as a consultant, you need to understand these approaches, so that once you meet a possible prospect, you need to make them go through this exercise through various models and operations and workshops and so on and so forth, until you start executing these accordingly. Okay, if that is the purpose that you come here for, right? But when you divulge from your Rise, from Rise 4 point of view, right? You already know your niche. You've done bit of digitalization from your perspective, a singular perspective. Now you're broad basing it. Okay, so you will come with a lot of authority in your niche. You'll come with a lot of authority with your technology that you know, and with the approaches that are mentioned through, you have a management kind of consultative role here, which will be convincing enough for a prospect to understand that you could be the trusted partner. Okay, so live with this, get to a point and ask the right kind of questions that you have, and you should be running with it very fast. Okay, with that, let's move on to the next one, where we will jump into the strategy framework, what goes into this. Okay, I mentioned the approaches which is written here. Both these diagrams that you see on the top left and the bottom are mentioning the same things, right, and put it in a constructive fashion. Now these are for you to assimilate, because visually typically it's better understanding a diagram, which you're free to use with your customers and so on and so forth, or you can modify the way you want it, so that depending on that the niche related or the vertical related approach that you want to take there, you can pick the approach accordingly. Okay, this is for your basic understanding. So with that, let me see you for the strategy framework, okay, in the next one. I'll see you there.